This week on The World Tomorrow, David Hulme.
Welcome to this new season of World Tomorrow programs. As we begin our 54th year of broadcasting, let's get our bearings again. What will the world be like in the next few years? Can we know for sure? Today, there are basically two views about the future of our civilization. They come from the optimist and the pessimist. The optimist sees a wonderful future, with man continuing to make progress in every field. There'll be increasing prosperity. Medical breakthroughs will continue to banish disease and prolong life. Travel to all parts of the earth will be quick and comfortable, and most of the tedious work will be done by robots. Man will be free to progress as never before, to live in peace and plenty on this planet, and maybe even travel to the moon and beyond, to raise up civilizations on distant planets. Not so, says the pessimist. Man's days are numbered. Famine, disease, pollution, destruction of the environment, overpopulation, and ever more terrible doomsday weapons mean that the future will be bleak indeed. The pessimist says that man has sown the seeds of his own destruction, and the continued ruthless exploitation of the planet will soon make civilization as we know it impossible. For the pessimist, there may be no world tomorrow. Well, who's right, the pessimist or the optimist, or neither? If there's one thing we can learn from the study of history, it's that empires and civilizations don't last forever. Even the most powerful empires eventually fall, some after a long period of decline, some in a sudden, spectacular collapse. Why is that? Why can't mankind ever build a great and noble civilization that stands the test of time, extending its influence over more and more people until all the earth feels the benefit of its rule? What is the natural order of things? Is decline and failure inevitable? And if so, what about our own civilization that looks so permanent today? Will it go the way of all the others? Is the pessimist right after all? I'm going to show you today that you can know what tomorrow will bring. We're going to see that there's a largely unrecognized pattern to history, a pattern laid out many hundreds of years ago. It's delineated the destiny of great empires and nations for 2,500 years. But historians in general have not taken this pattern seriously, and so they've missed the important dimension it brings to understanding the story of civilization. This pattern of history I'm referring to is found in a readily available source book, and there's nothing mysterious about it. I'm referring, of course, to the Bible. Now, most people know that the Bible contains many historical details, but it's history written with a purpose. The Bible's focus is to show us not only what happened, but why it happened, and the lessons we can learn. Most importantly, it shows us God's hand in history, a factor that can't be ignored if we're to properly understand the past. In the prophetic book of Daniel, chapter 2, verses 20 and 21, we find this challenging statement. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. We're going to take a look at this book of Daniel and find out why the Bible is such a fascinating and vital key to understanding the story of man's civilization. Yesterday, today, and more importantly, tomorrow. It's a big mistake to think that prophecies written in the Old Testament have nothing to do with us today. In the days when Daniel wrote, the fortunes of his people, the 12 tribe children of Israel, were at the lowest ebb. About 100 years before he was born, 10 of the original tribes had been deported from the land and taken into exile by the armies of the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. These Assyrians held sway over most of the area we now know as the Middle East, from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, and they were the dominant culture. They built the most powerful military state that had been seen up to that time. Renowned as fierce, cruel fighters and efficient administrators, they were also great builders, as archaeological finds have proven. Even today, these winged bulls from the Assyrian emperor's palace at Khorsabad are imposing. They were set at the entrance to the palace to guard the emperor against evil spirits and misfortune. The Assyrians who built these built them to last. They never believed that their empire would come to an end. The Emperor Sargon was master of his world, a man to be feared and respected. He never dreamed that these proud symbols of his majesty and power would end up thousands of miles away, here on display at the British Museum in London. But between 612 and 609 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire met its end, defeated by the Babylonians and the Medes. The Babylonians now became the dominant power, and the Babylonian king, ruling from his great capital city Babylon, began to forge a new civilization. Invading the land of ancient Judah beginning in 605 BC, the Babylonian armies defeated the remaining 2 Israelite tribes who'd made up the nation of Judah. Like the 10 tribes of Israel before them, they too were deported, this time to the land of their new masters, Babylonia. Among the initial captives was the young man Daniel. Daniel himself was held in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel chapter 2, we read how the emperor Nebuchadnezzar had dreamed a dream that troubled him. In his dream, Nebuchadnezzar had seen a great statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet made from a mixture of iron and clay. Daniel explained that the image represented 4 successive dominant empires. Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold. The other parts of the statue were other empires to follow. For Daniel, most of these events were a long way off, but within his lifetime, the Babylonian Empire did fall, suddenly and dramatically, in 539 BC. It was replaced by the empire of the Medes and the Persians, represented in the vision by the chest and arms of silver. Like the Assyrians and Babylonians before them, the Persians regarded their empire as permanent. When they took over from the Babylonian kings, they assumed their title, King of the World. This Persian relief panel comes from the palace of Darius at Susa. The Persian emperors issued decrees that were binding on all of their subjects throughout their empire. Today, we still use the expression, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, to indicate something that doesn't change over time. Back then, the emperor's word was law. But that civilization is gone. Their palaces lie in ruins. Now, the prophet Daniel knew the king Darius well. In fact, his account in the Bible records that Darius was to be addressed, "O king, live forever." But he didn't, and neither did his empire. The Persians continued for about 200 years, but they were eventually defeated by the Macedonian Greek armies of Alexander the Great. He laid the foundations of one of the most influential civilizations the world has ever known, represented in Nebuchadnezzar's dream by the belly and thighs of bronze. The empire he founded flourished around the shores of the eastern Mediterranean for several hundred years, and in many ways we still feel the influence of classical Greek culture, their art, their literature, their ways of thinking and doing things. The Greeks were masters of architecture, and the remains of their great buildings still impress us today, but that's all they are, remains and ruins. This broken statuary behind me once adorned the Parthenon in ancient Athens. Now, the people who put this together regarded it as permanent, not temporary. They didn't like to think of themselves as only temporary. But like the ancient Assyrians and Persians before them, their empire ultimately collapsed. All of this had been foreseen by the prophet Daniel more than 200 years before it happened. The Greeks ultimately gave way to the Romans, who built the mightiest empire the world had seen up to their time. They were the legs and feet of the image in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Rome's influence spread across Europe and North Africa. They took with them their genius for building and engineering. Significant numbers of their great works in civil engineering and architecture are still standing today. Roman civilization eventually came to Britain. Here at Richborough in southern England, the Roman army landed in 43 AD. They built this fort as a base camp. Eventually, Richborough became the gateway to the Roman province of Britannia, and the Romans dominated England for over 350 years. But there's not much to remind us today that this was once part of an empire that ruled over many lands and peoples. The triumphal arch, 80 feet high, stood near here, visible from the galleys as they came into port. Today it's gone, like the civilization that built it. Barbarian tribes put greater and greater pressure on the Romans until they had to withdraw from Britain in 410 AD in order to defend other parts of their realm. In 476 AD, the mighty Roman Empire in Europe fell. So the vision Nebuchadnezzar had seen accurately described the rise and fall of 4 great empires: the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans. Does the Bible have anything to say about the modern world as it does the empires of antiquity? That's a question I'm going to answer in the second part of our program today. But before I do that, I want to offer some important free literature that further expands what we're covering today. It's entitled, Who or What is the Prophetic Beast? It shows how the Bible specifically prophesied the rise and fall of these prominent ancient civilizations. But more importantly, it also tells about a powerful supernation, described as a terrifying beast in the pages of the Bible that is yet to come. This is something that's going to have a great impact on your life in the years ahead, and you need to know about it. In the center of this booklet is a very useful chart showing how to fit together these Bible prophecies about civilization. You'll find this a very useful aid to have beside you as you study these things in your own Bible. So be sure to request this free booklet, Who or What is the Prophetic Beast? Along with this booklet, we'll be sending you a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. I'll be offering these publications again at the end of today's program. Now let's get back to our theme on today's World Tomorrow program. What does the Bible have to say about the future of civilization on Earth? Can civilization as we know it survive? If the Bible has any relevance for us today, does it make sense that it would mention numerous ancient peoples, yet ignore modern-day nations, especially the nations who've been most dominant in this 20th century? When we look at civilization today, it's obvious that 2 nations have, above all, influenced our modern world, just as the Greeks and Romans once influenced antiquity. Those nations are Great Britain and the United States. In the last century, the British pioneered the way into the Industrial Revolution. In every part of the world, British architects and engineers went to work spanning rivers, tunneling through mountains, and laying down railways. At its height, the British Empire was the greatest empire that the world had ever seen, ruling more than 1/4 of the Earth's population. Then, as British power began to level out and decline, the United States commenced its spectacular ascent to greatness. Today, the United States appears to the world as unbelievably rich, powerful, and influential. For better or worse, American entertainment, American music, American fads and fashions, and even American eating habits are imitated in nearly every country on Earth. As the world was once dominated by Greece and Rome, history will show that it's the British and American people who, more than any other nations, have left their stamp on the 20th century. And so we're faced with the question, will these peoples go the way of all the others? It's interesting that many economists, commentators, business leaders, having seen the decline of British dominance, are beginning to foresee an end to the days of American dominance. This article, Anglo-Saxon Twilight, appeared in the London Times recently. It's by economists Tim Congdon and David Hale. They write, over the past century, the world economy has been dominated by 2 countries, the United Kingdom and the United States of America. But, they say, because of the advance of Japan and Western Europe since 1945, Anglo-America no longer has such a commanding influence over international economic relations. The Economist magazine ran this article, Diminished Giants, about the decline of British and American power. It says, in part, America at the end of the 20th century has much in common with Britain at the end of the 19th. it has lost its economic preeminence. And bringing us back to our theme, in his letter from America, Alistair Cook said recently, "In America, the race is on between its vitality and its decadence. This happens to all great empires." Now, I realize that these men, writing and speaking, are not basing their ideas on anything they've read in the Bible. At least I doubt it. But the signs are there. These influential nations may well be going the way of so many others in history. Will it happen? If it does, when will it happen? And when America and Britain are gone, who will replace them? Is there any way to know for sure? Over 3,000 years ago, the Bible predicted the rise in influence and power of Britain and the United States, as well as Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and other northwestern European democracies. It's a long and fascinating story, too long to tell today, but other programs in this series will explain it in greater detail. Very briefly, though, God had made certain promises to the patriarch Abraham. Promises which eventually were passed on to Jacob, the father of the 12 sons who eventually became the 12 tribes of Israel. The promises were very specific. In Genesis 35 and verse 11, we find this. "Also God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body." Jacob was told that his descendants at some future time would become two groups of people, one a great nation and the other a company of nations. Who are those nations today? Now Daniel knew that God had made these promises, and he trusted God. But as he reflected on his exiled people, both Judah and Israel, he came to realize that they'd brought it on themselves. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 7 reads this, "O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day, to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those near and those far off, in all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you." God had said through Moses that all would go well with his people, with abundance of material wealth, if they would obey his law. If they didn't, then the blessings of obedience would be withdrawn, and a specific period of punishment would follow. Now this is exactly what has happened. Beginning in 721 BC, with the captivity of the 10 tribes of Israel by the Assyrians, a period of 2,520 years passed. That brings us in history to 1800 AD, when the time came for God to fulfill his promise of greatness to the birthright-holding people of ancient Israel. Since 1800, it's the British and American peoples who've become a company or commonwealth of nations and the greatest single nation, and have dominated the 19th and 20th centuries. Could anything be a more significant fulfillment of the prophecies made to the ancient patriarch Abraham? But sadly, the English-speaking peoples haven't learned the lesson of their forefathers, that their prosperity and peace depends on obedience to the law of God. And so history is about to repeat itself. You see, the events anticipated in Nebuchadnezzar's vision of the great image continue on past the fall of the old Roman Empire. The Bible shows that the Roman system would actually be resurrected in Europe over and over again. And we're about to see the final revival of the Roman Empire in our time. In the years just ahead, we're going to witness drastic changes in the balance of power. Today, most think the greatest threat to peace is the superpower rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. But a third superpower, greater than Russia or America, is on the drawing boards in Europe. The European nations are making great progress in putting aside their ancient rivalries and forging a union. Certainly, their intentions are peaceful, and unity is a praiseworthy goal. But the Bible shows that economic, political, and religious circumstances will cause this peaceful union to change its nature. To the shock and dismay of today's architects of a new Europe, men dedicated to a worthy ideal, what we'll see rear up one day is the last awesome resurrection of the Roman Empire. symbolized by the 10 toes on the feet of iron and clay in Daniel's vision. It'll be a loose, short-lived confederation of 10 states or groups of states, and not necessarily the same groupings as in present-day Europe. The Bible shows us what will happen next. These states, under the leadership of a very determined leader, will confront a secular world with full fury. Among the first to feel that fury will be the decadent Anglo-Saxon nations. It will become the worst time of trouble the world has ever known. Jesus put it very clearly in Matthew 24 and verse 21. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be. And so, paradoxically, with the best of intentions, the most progressive and technically advanced civilization the world has known will bring humanity to the point where man would destroy himself unless God intervened. This is the ultimate lesson of history, the outcome of man's efforts to build a civilization that works. But God does intervene. Let me show you the encouraging and reassuring end to Nebuchadnezzar's dream recorded in Daniel chapter 2, verses 34 and 35. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. Daniel went on to explain what this extraordinary event means in verses 44 and 45. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. The vision shows nothing less than the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth. Jesus spoke often of how he would establish his kingdom on earth. He was referring to this same event prophesied in the book of Daniel, something that will take place in the years just ahead of us now. Here, then, is the final chapter in the story of man's civilization. The lesson of history and prophecy is that by ourselves we cannot build the world we all so desperately want. And we'll learn that the hard way. But when we have learned it, God will establish a civilization that will never be destroyed, a kingdom that will give mankind all he's ever dreamed of. That's the good news that Jesus Christ brought to this earth, the good news of the kingdom of God. Now, you might say that's a pretty hopeless immediate future, that I'm just dangling a carrot out in front of you, a promise that everything will get better someday. And what are we supposed to do in the meantime? Well, we do what Daniel did. We keep the law of God. We benefit now from doing that. We enjoy God's protection personally, and as Christ said in Luke chapter 21 and verse 36, watch therefore, and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man. And what you really do need to do first is study and prove for yourself what I've said today. This free booklet, Who or What is the Prophetic Beast, is key to understanding the prophecies in Daniel and the book of Revelation. It's yours free for the asking, no cost and no obligation. It organizes some of the most difficult prophetic scriptures into a clear and understandable pattern. Here they are laid out in chart form in a way that's easy to grasp. You'll find you'll refer to this section often as you study the Bible's prophecies for our time. Now, no one is going to ask you for money or to join any organization. All of our literature is free of charge, without obligation. That's simply our policy on the world tomorrow. Along with this booklet, if you're not already a subscriber, we'll also be sending you a free trial subscription to the Plain Truth magazine for as long as you want. It's published in 7 languages and read by millions worldwide. Your subscription is absolutely free of charge. This magazine is one of the best of its kind, unique in its perspective on world events. Looking at the news and trends from the viewpoint of the Bible, the Plain Truth is an indispensable companion to the news we get from television, newspapers, and news magazines. The Plain Truth does more than just report the news. It gives the reasons behind the headlines. But it's not just a news magazine. There are also timely articles about important social issues, issues that concern your family, your finances, your health, and other aspects of daily life. You simply can't afford to be without it. So for a free subscription to The Plain Truth and this free booklet, Who or What is the Prophetic Beast, please telephone for the cost of a local call 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. If you found today's program stimulating and you'd like to write, then please do so. We value your questions and comments and appreciate hearing from you. Simply send your letters to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales 2001. That's The World Tomorrow.